Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to say is not just big, it's historic. It's a revelation, a spiritual truth wrapped in power. India has won against Pakistan, not just with strength, we knew they had that, but with something even bigger, with silence, with poise, with dignity, with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you're already ahead. Now look, I've seen a lot of battles, I've seen winners, I've seen losers, but this is not just a win. This is a masterclass in how to win. India didn't flinch. India didn't panic. It didn't waste time reacting to every little noise. It looked forward. It stayed focused. It detached emotionally. And guess what? That's how giants behave. That's how winners operate. When you're rooted in purpose, you don't chase chaos. You rise above it. You want to understand something very powerful. When you're spiritually strong, you don't need to fight everything, because your silence is louder than their noise. Your peace is more dangerous than their rage. That's what India showed. It didn't clap back. It didn't scream. It didn't try to outshout anyone. It just kept building, kept growing, kept dominating economically, spiritually, and globally. You can't provoke a man or a nation that is already seated in victory. You can't shake someone who has nothing to prove. And that's India. It stood there firm like a mountain while the wind howled. That's emotional detachment. That's the kind of spiritual clarity that turns battles into stepping stones. Let me tell you, the moment you stop reacting, that's when you start ruling. India won because it knew the war was never about bullets. It was about identity, about discipline, about divine confidence. You look at Pakistan, loud, chaotic, reactive, always trying to pull India into the mud, and India calm, composed, unmoved. That's how empires behave. That's how wisdom acts. There is divine power in restraint, and India held it like a sword. The world watched. Oh, they watched, and they saw something incredible. Not just a military edge. They saw spiritual maturity. India didn't descend. It ascended, because only the weak fight with fists. The strong, they conquer with vision, with economy, with education, with faith. That's what's happening. This isn't just a regional rivalry anymore. This is a global example. When you detach from drama, you become unstoppable. That's what India tapped into. They refused to dance to someone else's song. They played their own music, and the world started listening. You see, the truly powerful don't react to attacks. They respond with destiny. They respond with excellence. And that's what we're seeing, a nation committed not to petty battles, but to greatness. And let me tell you something profound. When the lion walks forward, it doesn't even glance at the jackals barking behind. That's what India did. Didn't turn, didn't flinch, just kept walking. That's what victory looks like. It's not noise, it's not rage, it's quiet strength, controlled fire, divine confidence. India is not just winning, it has won, because it became bigger than the fight, because it outgrew the conflict, because it learned the secret every great leader, every great nation eventually learns: when you conquer yourself, your emotions, your pride, your ego, then nobody can conquer you. And that, my friends, is how India beat Pakistan. Victory is not just on the battlefield, it is first won in the soul. Before a nation claims triumph over its adversaries, it must first conquer itself. That inner victory, that sacred discipline over emotion, thought, and reaction is the real foundation of lasting success. India's greatest achievement in this dynamic wasn't just outmaneuvering a rival or showcasing power through weapons or tactics. It was staying rooted, unmoved, and clear in purpose. That is how true nations rise. Not in the noise of conflict, but in the clarity of self-realization. The world often celebrates external victories, the kind captured by headlines, footage, and firepower. But those victories, while important, are short-lived if they're not backed by internal strength. India demonstrated something far greater: the power to resist provocation, the wisdom to remain calm when mocked, and the strategic brilliance to keep building while being challenged. That isn't just maturity, it is mastery. It reveals that before India responded to any threat, it had already made a spiritual decision. We will not lose ourselves. And once a people, a nation, or a leader makes that choice, the rest is inevitable. There is something deeply spiritual about silence that doesn't come from fear, but from wisdom. India didn't need to make noise. It didn't chase every accusation or react to every poke. It chose elevation. And that's because the soul of India had already won. It had already settled the battle within, the battle between pride and purpose, between anger and clarity, between ego and destiny. That internal alignment gave India the strength to not only survive provocations, but to grow stronger through them. A country that knows who it is cannot be destabilized by those who haven't found themselves. India operated from identity. It acted from wholeness, not insecurity. That's why its moves were calculated, its decisions confident, and its silence deafening. Because the soul of India had found peace, and peace is a powerful weapon when others are consumed by rage. India didn't win with more hatred, it won by being unshaken by it. And that's what separates the temporary from the eternal. The true battlefield is the space between reaction and restraint. Most lose in that gap. They respond too quickly, too emotionally, and end up entangled in the conflict that drains their future. India, however, preserved its energy. It chose discipline over impulse. That internal choice shaped its external victories. It didn't need to prove strength. It embodied it. It didn't need validation. It was already validated by its own stability. And when a nation carries that kind of internal certainty, it becomes undefeatable, not just by tanks or treaties, but by time itself, because it's not fighting to survive, it's living to lead. India's win against Pakistan was not about who had more firepower or more followers. It was about who had the soul to stand firm, to stay focused, and to walk forward, regardless of the noise behind them. That's why India has already won. The battlefield was only the echo. The victory began and ended in the soul. Emotional detachment is not weakness, it is divine power under control in a world where outrage is celebrated and reaction is mistaken for strength. The one who can stand calm while storms rage around him is the one who holds the true power. India proved this in its silent, unshaken approach. It didn't flinch, it didn't retaliate with panic, it simply stood with clarity and unbothered conviction. That's not passivity, that's sovereignty. That is the kind of spiritual maturity that makes empires unbreakable. People often think that reacting with emotion shows passion, but in truth it often reveals instability. Real strength isn't about how loud you can shout, it's about how deeply you can remain still. India's detachment wasn't about indifference, it was about choosing not to be ruled by the chaos others tried to create. It understood something vital: when you're emotionally invested in every insult, every threat, every jab, you become predictable. When you detach from the drama, you become untouchable. And that's what India became, untouchable, because it wouldn't be baited. There's great power in holding your emotions back, not suppressing them, but mastering them. When your emotions are under your control, you think sharper, you move wiser, and you strike with purpose, not from provocation. That's what India showed. The world watched and expected fire for fire, insult for insult, escalation for escalation. But instead, India stayed focused. That is not weakness. That is warfare from a higher plane. That is divine discipline, the kind of control that cannot be taught by military drills, but is learned in the chambers of inner wisdom. When you are emotionally detached, you are not less human, you are more powerful. You're no longer at the mercy of other people's chaos. You begin to live by your own inner compass, not external noise. India's restraint wasn't hesitation, it was intention. It was the decision to lead rather than chase. When others screamed for attention, India stayed anchored in purpose. It refused to be pulled into a spiral of emotional chaos. That refusal was its real offense. We live in a time where reacting is easier than reflecting, but India chose reflection, it chose timing, it chose peace, not because it was weak, but because it was wise. That level of emotional discipline isn't just national character, it's spiritual authority. It sends a message more powerful than retaliation ever could. We do not need to destroy you to prove who we are. That's real dominance, not in conquering land, but in conquering self. The truth is, detachment builds clarity, and clarity makes decisions that last. India's decisions weren't made to impress the moment. They were crafted to shape the future. That only happens when a nation has matured beyond needing to shout to be heard, because when you are truly strong, your silence speaks louder than your enemy's noise. And that's what India demonstrated: emotional detachment, not as escape, but as elevated warfare, divine power fully under control. Peace is a position of power, not surrender. It is not the absence of strength, but the evidence of it. India's commitment to peace in the face of provocation did not signal weakness. It announced dominance. A nation that chooses not to respond with immediate aggression, despite having the means to do so, demonstrates a higher level of mastery. India didn't avoid conflict because it couldn't handle it. It avoided it because it had already outgrown it. That is not surrender. That is sovereignty. Real power is quiet. Doesn't have to roar. It doesn't need to flex its muscles for the world to see. Peace is the confidence that comes from knowing that you can destroy, but you won't, because your mission is bigger than a reaction. That's what India understood. While others shouted threats and painted pictures of conflict, India walked steadily forward, focused not on destruction, but development. That path, calm, strategic, unapologetic, is the road of a nation rooted in power. When a country is still building schools, developing its economy, sending satellites into space, and elevating its global partnerships, while others are consumed with war cries, it becomes obvious who is really in control. Peace does not mean India was asleep. No, it was awake, wide awake, but awake to a higher calling. It knew that fighting every battle means losing the war of destiny, and destiny is what India is after. Not headlines, not applause, not revenge. People confuse restraint for retreat. But those who understand true leadership know that not every challenge requires a response. Not every insult requires a reply. India made a choice to engage only on its own terms, in its own time, and for its own purpose. And that's the mark of a power that doesn't bow to pressure, that doesn't perform for the gallery. That is the strength of a nation aligned with its vision. A peacemaker is not a coward. A peacemaker is a builder, and builders have more to lose in war than destroyers ever will. India knew that its real battle was not in borders, but in ideas, innovation, and influence. It didn't step back, it stepped up. It built alliances, it expanded trade, it grew its military not to use it recklessly, but to possess it responsibly. That's power under discipline. That's peace with purpose. In the end, peace is not something you plead for. It is something you stand in. When you stand firm, when you remain unshaken while others rage, you begin to reshape the atmosphere. That's what India did. It didn't descend into conflict. It lifted the conversation, didn't trade fire. It showed foresight. And in that position of peace, India sent a clear message to the world. We're not avoiding battle because we're afraid to lose. We're avoiding battle because we've already won where it matters most. In our minds, in our spirit, and in our future. When you know who you are, you don't need to prove it. That is the essence of true power. Silent, secure, and unshaken. India didn't scream to be recognized. It didn't fight to be seen. It simply walked forward with confidence because it already knew its worth. That's what maturity looks like. When a nation or a person becomes rooted in identity, there is no need to constantly react or perform. There is no desperation in action, only intention. That's what separates noise from legacy. India's silence was not absence, it was assurance. The insecure always shout. They need validation, they demand recognition because deep down they are not sure of their place. But when you are sure, when you are clear, when your foundation is unshakable, you don't waste energy defending what is already settled. India did not entertain provocation because it had already made peace with itself. Its victories were not built in public rallies or international press. They were secured in the discipline of purpose, the focus of strategy, and the calm of knowing what truly matters. It's easy to mistake silence for fear or restraint for doubt, but only those who lack self-knowledge fall for that illusion. India didn't engage in every argument because it wasn't seeking approval from its adversary. It didn't retaliate in emotion because it wasn't confused about its identity. When a nation knows who it is, it doesn't flinch when challenged. It It becomes still, not because it is weak, but because it has already won the internal war of significance. There is a quiet force that comes with self-awareness. It's not loud. It doesn't show off, but it moves mountains. It builds empires. It writes history, not with tweets, but with transformation. That's what India is doing. While others wage war to be noticed, India is being noticed because it didn't join the war. Its vision is higher, its goals broader, and its strength deeper. That doesn't come from equipment. It comes from essence, from knowing who you are and who you are not. There's a divine boldness in walking your own path, undisturbed by the noise around you. That boldness doesn't shout, it builds. It doesn't provoke, it prepares. India understood that true leaders don't explain themselves. They demonstrate who they are through action, consistency, and results. And the world took notice, not because India shouted, but because it remained consistent in the face of provocation. That is strength. That is leadership. In the end, identity is everything. If you're not rooted in who you are, you'll be tossed by every storm, triggered by every insult, and distracted by every attack. But when you know yourself, truly know yourself, nothing can pull you off course. India stayed on course. It didn't get tangled in shallow wars because it was anchored in a deeper purpose. That's why it won, not just over Pakistan, but over every attempt to pull it into a game that didn't deserve its energy. Because when you know who you are, you don't need to prove it. You just become it. You don't fight noise with more noise. You answer it with results. That is the principle that separates leaders from followers, the elevated from the emotional. When provoked, most respond with fury, words, and retaliation. But the wise don't match energy. They transcend it. India didn't get dragged into the chaos. It didn't echo the shouting from across the border. It focused, it executed, it delivered results so undeniable that no amount of shouting could bury the truth. In that, India didn't just respond, it rose. That's what results do. They rise above noise and crush it with undeniable evidence. Words can be twisted, but outcomes cannot. Opinions shift, but accomplishments stay. And India played the long game. It didn't rush to respond with anger because it was too busy responding with progress. While others tried to provoke with blame, India responded with development. While some manufactured headlines, India manufactured success. The proof didn't come from argument, it came from achievement. And in today's world, that's what silences critics better than any speech ever could. Every insult hurled toward India was met with a greater expansion of its economy. Every provocation was met with an even stronger technological stride, military advancement, or diplomatic breakthrough. It's the kind of answer that can't be denied, because when your adversary sees you thriving despite their attacks, it creates a frustration far more powerful than retaliation. India chose that path not because it couldn't respond, but because it had already determined that progress was the most strategic form of power. Anyone can react. That's easy. That's what the weak do. They jump at every opportunity to scream back. But to build quietly, to work while being mocked, to remain composed while being insulted, that takes strength, that takes vision, and it takes trust in one's own future. India wasn't trying to prove a point. It was creating a legacy. It didn't enter the arena of noise because its destination was not in the crowd. It was in the sky. Results speak, and when they speak, they shut down every other voice trying to distract. India didn't need to prove its place on the global stage through conflict. It proved it through contribution. It became the answer not by tearing others down, but by lifting itself up. And in doing so, it made all the noise irrelevant. Because when you arrive at success, the debate ends. The scoreboard speaks louder than the microphone. The truth is, noise is temporary. It fades, it changes, it gets replaced. But results, they echo across generations. India understood this. It didn't react to the moment because it was already invested in the future. And that's why it won, not by arguing, not by shouting, but by delivering undeniable proof of who it is and where it's going. That's how you end noise, not with volume, but with victory. God blesses nations that refuse to bow to hatred. There is a divine order to how the world works, an invisible law that elevates the righteous and exposes the corrupt. When a nation chooses peace over provocation, dignity over destruction, and discipline over chaos, it aligns itself with a higher power. India didn't respond to hatred with more hatred. It didn't stoop to the level of those who wanted conflict. Instead, it rose. It rose through spiritual strength, moral restraint, and the wisdom to walk away from a fire meant to consume both sides. That is why India is being elevated, not by chance, but by divine favor. Hatred is easy. It's contagious. It pulls people in with emotion, with tribalism, with vengeance. But hatred blinds. It corrupts decisions. It poisons minds. And those who serve it ultimately destroy themselves. India made a conscious decision to break that cycle. It didn't feed the flames. It refused to burn. That kind of restraint is not passive. It's prophetic. It's the behavior of a nation that understands it's being watched not only by the world, but by something greater. And that nation will always be protected, promoted, and prosper. India was not silent out of fear. It was disciplined out of purpose. It knew that matching anger with anger is the fastest way to lose sight of progress, and India chose progress. It refused to allow hatred to determine its steps. Instead, it chose to move in alignment with principles that build, not destroy. That spiritual alignment of refusing to bow to bitterness is the reason doors are opening, opportunities are multiplying, and the world is turning its eyes toward India with respect. You see, hatred may win the crowd, but it never wins the crown. The crowd is loud, emotional, temporary. But the crown of legacy, honor, growth that is reserved for those who operate with higher principles. India's rise is not accidental. It's the result of disciplined mercy. It's the outcome of walking in vision, not vengeance. There's a reason why the world is partnering with India, investing in it, trusting its leadership, because when you lead with values, heaven backs you. There's a kind of power that doesn't come from missiles or media. It comes from walking in truth when it's easier to retaliate. That power builds nations. That power shakes the enemies of peace. And that's what India displayed. It didn't bow to hatred. It didn't conform to the pressure of responding with rage. It stood, not with arrogance, but with assurance. And when a nation stands like that, rooted in truth, unshaken by noise, there's nothing on earth that can stop it. India didn't defeat its enemy by becoming like it. It defeated its enemy by refusing to become like it. That's where the blessing is. That's why India continues to rise, because God blesses the nation that says no to hatred and yes to higher ground. In that choice, India didn't just win a moment, it earned a future. And that kind of victory can't be taken away. Victory is not revenge, it's revelation. When a nation achieves true victory, it's not just about defeating an opponent. It's about revealing who it really is and what it truly stands for. India's triumph was not the result of retaliation. It was the product of self-realization. It didn't seek to punish Pakistan to feel powerful. It stood tall to reveal that power already resided within. This victory wasn't fueled by bitterness. It was driven by purpose. It wasn't about responding to an enemy. It was about rising into identity. And when you rise into who you are meant to be, the world takes notice. Revenge is temporary. It satisfies ego, not destiny. But revelation is eternal. It shifts how the world sees you and how you see yourself. India didn't have to reduce itself to the emotional level of those trying to provoke it. It didn't need to fight in the mud. Instead, it stayed focused, strategic, calm, and in doing so, it revealed its spiritual elevation. That's a different kind of war. That's not fought with missiles, that's fought with maturity. And maturity wins wars that weapons can't. When India chose not to retaliate emotionally, it made a louder statement than any counterattack could have made. It declared, we are no longer who we used to be. It showed the world that this is not the India that reacts, this is the India that leads. That evolution, that level of discipline is not a retreat from power. It is the highest form of it, because real victory isn't about crushing your enemy. It's about outgrowing the need to. True triumph reveals character. It unveils the spirit behind the strategy. India's actions demonstrated that it values dignity over drama, wisdom over war, and legacy over ego. That's not just good leadership, that's divine alignment. Because when you step into your true identity, you don't get pulled into every conflict. You become the example, you become the revelation others cannot ignore. And that's what India has become, a revelation of what happens when purpose is prioritized over provocation. The power of this kind of victory is that it's not reactive, it's intentional. It wasn't about punishing a rival, it was about protecting a vision. It wasn't about clapping back, it was about climbing higher. That mindset separates rulers from reactionaries. And India ruled this moment not through force, but through wisdom. It revealed its strength not through war cries, but through unwavering direction. Let the world understand this. When a nation wins without becoming bitter, when it rises without dragging others down, when it leads without losing its soul, that's revelation. That's transformation. That's leadership that inspires beyond borders. India didn't just respond to a threat, it responded to a calling. And in doing so, it revealed its destiny. This was never about revenge. This was always about becoming what it was born to be. A lion doesn't turn around when a dog barks. That simple truth carries the weight of generations of wisdom, and India embodied it with clarity and confidence. In the face of noise, provocation, and endless attempts to distract, India didn't look back. It didn't respond to every shout, every accusation, every attempt to lure it into a pointless confrontation. Like a lion, it kept walking because it already knew who it was. It had no need to roar back at a sound that couldn't touch its strength. And that is the real mark of power, not how loud you are, but how focused you remain. There's something majestic about refusing to be disturbed by the chaos beneath you. The barking is meant to intimidate, to draw you in, to force a reaction. But the lion understands that responding is unnecessary. Its power isn't diminished by silence. In fact, its silence becomes terrifying. That's the posture India adopted, not one of fear, but of command. It didn't stop to argue. It didn't lower itself to explain. It moved forward because forward is where legacy is built. In moments of conflict, many are tempted to look back, to answer every insult, to match every cry. But that's how vision gets blurred. That's how momentum is lost. India refused to be pulled into that trap. It had too much to build, too much to protect, too much to pursue. It realized that the real battle was not in the noise behind, but in the future ahead. And staying the course takes more courage than fighting every distraction along the way. The barking was loud, but it lacked direction, it lacked strategy, it lacked substance. India understood this, and instead of trying to win the argument, it focused on winning the outcome. While others wasted time yelling, India expanded. While others plotted chaos, India planted idea. It poured itself into the future, into development, innovation, and global partnerships. That was the real roar, not made with words, but with results. And there is profound strength in restraint. The lion doesn't have to prove it's a lion. Its very presence does that. In the same way, India didn't have to prove anything to Pakistan. It didn't have to defend itself in the court of global opinion because its actions were already speaking for it. Its stability, its growth, its clarity, all of it pointed to a nation that had evolved beyond petty rivalries. And so while the barking tried to distract, the lion kept building. While others screamed for attention, India gained it through action. That's how nations rise, not through noise, but through nobility, not by turning around, but by moving forward. And every time India refused to respond in the way it was expected to, it reminded the world, we are not here to play small games. We are here to lead. We are here to build. We are here to walk forward with the authority of a lion and the purpose of a nation that knows where it's going. Real war is within, and India mastered itself first. Before any nation can claim victory in the external world, it must confront the internal battlefield, the one where fear, pride, insecurity, and emotion all wage silent war. India's true triumph wasn't just military or strategic. It was psychological, emotional, and deeply spiritual. It chose mastery over reaction. It chose composure over chaos. It defeated not just an external threat, but the temptation to be pulled into emotional warfare, and that inner control became the foundation of its outer dominance. The easiest thing in the world is to react. The hardest thing is to respond with purpose. When provoked, when insulted, when tested, many fall into the trap of retaliation, but India paused. It reflected. It measured its response. That pause, rooted not in weakness but in deep strength, was the evidence that the real war had already been won internally. When a nation has control over its emotions, its ego, its desire for instant gratification, it becomes untouchable because nothing can move a people who have already mastered themselves. This kind of internal mastery is not taught in war rooms. It is cultivated through discipline, through vision, and through trust in something greater than immediate victory. India wasn't looking to win headlines. It was looking to win history. And to win history, you must first be grounded in who you are. You must refuse to allow enemies to define the terms of the battle. You must control the atmosphere, not be controlled by it. India controlled the atmosphere with stillness, and in doing so, it dictated the tempo of the entire conflict. The real war is not fought with weapons, but with will. It is fought in the silent moments when a nation must decide whether to rise to a higher calling or fall into base emotion. India chose to rise. It knew that maturity is not passive, it is powerful. That true strength is not in how loud you are, but in how consistent, focused, and composed you remain when the pressure builds. That's where transformation happens. That's where leadership is born. India's self-control was its most dangerous weapon, because when your opponent is trying to provoke you and you refuse to flinch, you strip them of their power, you reveal their desperation, and that is what happened. India exposed weakness not by shouting it out, but by showing what strength actually looks like. Silence became strategy, stillness became superiority. And in mastering itself, India created a path that others now watch, now study, now respect, because nothing shakes a nation that has fought its internal war and won. And that victory, quiet, disciplined, and deliberate, is the most lasting kind of all. When you master yourself first, no enemy can ever truly defeat you. India became the example. It taught the world that the greatest victories begin not with reaction, but with restraint. Not with noise, but with knowing, and that knowing changed everything. Detachment isn't apathy, it's clarity. When a nation chooses not to respond emotionally, when it steps back, not out of fear, but out of vision, that is not the absence of care, it is the presence of wisdom. India's calm, disciplined posture in the face of provocation wasn't a sign of passivity. It was a powerful display of clarity, the clarity to know what matters, what deserves attention, and what simply doesn't. While others tried to provoke chaos, India chose focus. It didn't react from ego, it responded from alignment. That choice wasn't emotional, it was strategic. And in that clarity, it revealed its strength. Apathy is numbness. It is disengagement, it is giving up. But detachment is none of those things. Detachment is discipline. It is the decision to act from purpose instead of reaction. It is standing still while the storm rages. Not because you don't feel it, but because you've already decided it's not going to move you. That is power. And India held that power like a nation that had already seen beyond the battle in front of it. It had a longer vision, a broader horizon. It refused to trade that clarity for temporary noise. When you are truly clear, you stop needing to prove yourself. You stop giving your energy to things that are beneath your calling. That's what India displayed in the face of heated rhetoric, in the face of deliberate provocation. It didn't rush to shout back. It didn't abandon its future to win a moment. That is rare, and that is exactly why it stood tall, because clarity brings patience, and patience creates legacy. The world often misunderstands this kind of composure. It sees silence and assumes fear. It sees detachment and assumes weakness. But only the wise know what it really is, a sign of overwhelming inner strength. To stand still in the heat of provocation, to choose not to be moved, to let go of emotional bait takes more courage than retaliation ever will. India wasn't looking for a fight, it was looking at the future. It wasn't avoiding war out of cowardice, it was building peace out of intelligence. This clarity allowed India to move with precision, not confusion. It allowed the nation to focus on growth, diplomacy, innovation, and leadership instead of being dragged into emotional warfare. That decision, repeated again and again, is how empires are built, not by reacting to every insult, but by refusing to be distracted from the real mission. And clarity protects the mission. It filters the noise. It separates urgency from importance. Detachment in its highest form is not withdrawal, it's leadership. It's the ability to guide your emotions rather than be guided by them. And that's what India modeled to the world. It stood in its power, not because it was indifferent, but because it was clear. And in that clarity, it became immovable, unshaken, focused. And that kind of focus doesn't just win battles, it shapes nations. India shaped its future by refusing to lose itself in the present. And that is the ultimate expression of power. So now you've seen it, you've felt it, and you understand it. India didn't just win a contest of strength, it won the war of wisdom, the battle of restraint, the test of true character. It didn't rise by shouting louder, it rose by standing taller. It didn't look back, it looked forward. And in doing so, it showed the world what greatness really looks like. Not in chaos, not in anger, not in endless conflict, but in calm confidence and divine discipline, and the sacred power of emotional and spiritual detachment. This was never just about defeating an enemy, it was about becoming unshakable. India became the lion that doesn't turn around, the builder that doesn't break focus, the leader that doesn't lower itself. And now it stands not only as a regional power, but as a global example. Because the true winners in history are not the ones who destroy, but the ones who build. Not the ones who react, but the ones who rise. And India has risen. Let this be the message for every nation, every leader, every soul watching. When you master yourself, no enemy can master you, and you choose peace over ego, vision over vengeance, and purpose over provocation. Nothing can stop your destiny. India didn't just win the battle, it became the blueprint. And the future now bends toward those who walk in strength, in silence, in purpose, and in truth. India has won, not just over Pakistan, but over everything that tried to pull it down, and it will keep winning, because it has learned the greatest secret of all. The strongest power is the power you don't have to show.